On March 16, 37 AD, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire died on the island of Capri, and with his final breath, a nightmare that had consumed countless children finally ended. But the horrors that occurred in those marble halls over 7 years would echo through history, as one of the darkest chapters of absolute power corrupted absolutely. This is the story of Emperor Tiberius Julius Caesar Augustus, the man who transformed a Mediterranean paradise into a living hell for Rome's most innocent victims. Imagine for a moment that you are standing on the shores of the Bay of Naples in the year 30 AD. You watch as three imperial galleys cut through the crystal waters, their purple sails emblazoned with Rome's golden eagle. To most citizens, these ships represent power and glory. But to the families of coastal fishing villages, they bring only terror. The emperor is collecting again. Tiberius, once celebrated as Rome's most capable leader, had abandoned his capital 5 years earlier under the pretense of declining health. He retreated to Capri, that jewel of an island rising from the Tyrrhenian Sea, 12 miles from the Italian mainland. What Romans believed was a temporary withdrawal became permanent exile, and what began as imperial retreat evolved into something far more sinister. The Villa Hobbies sprawled across Capri's highest plateau, a masterpiece of Roman engineering covering nearly 7,000 square meters. Its architects had created something unprecedented, a complex of bathhouses, private chambers, and elaborately designed pools carved directly into living rock. These weren't ordinary bathing facilities. They were precision-built for purposes that would make even hardened soldiers turn away in disgust. The pools varied in depth and temperature, connected by underwater passages that created aquatic spaces where sound couldn't escape beyond marble walls. Imperial agents fanned across coastal regions with specific instructions. They weren't recruiting soldiers or selecting servants. They were hunting for boys between 8 and 14 years old who possessed one particular skill: the ability to hold their breath underwater for extended periods. Children who spent their days diving for shells and fishing were watched, evaluated, and catalogued. Those who could stay submerged for more than 2 minutes found their names added to lists forwarded directly to Capri. The selection process was methodical and absolute. When imperial ships arrived at a village, there was no negotiation. Soldiers carried documents bearing the emperor's seal, granting them authority to conscript any child they deemed suitable for specialized imperial service. Fathers who protested were arrested. Mothers who screamed were silenced. The children themselves, confused and terrified, were loaded into cargo holds like livestock and transported to an island that would become their prison. What awaited them there was a system of abuse so organized, so calculated, that it functioned with the efficiency of any Roman administrative institution. And at the center of it all sat Tiberius, the man who had once been Rome's greatest hope, now transformed into something history would struggle to comprehend. If you're captivated by the hidden darkness of history, the stories that textbooks won't tell, please consider subscribing. These forgotten truths need to be remembered, and your support helps ensure these voices aren't lost to time. This story only gets darker from here. The Roman historian Suetonius, writing in his Lives of the 12 Caesars just decades after Tiberius's death, documented what investigators discovered when they finally entered the sealed Villa Hobbies' accounts. Though sometimes written in careful euphemisms, leave no ambiguity about what occurred in those marble halls. He described how Tiberius created teams of young boys he called his little fishes, trained to perform acts in the emperor's private pools that served his increasingly deviant appetites. These weren't occasional crimes of opportunity. This was systematic exploitation operating continuously for 7 years, consuming hundreds of young lives in its machinery of abuse. The boys who arrived at Capri underwent immediate transformation from children into instruments of imperial pleasure. They were housed in dormitories near the main pool complex, where older survivors whispered desperate survival instructions to newcomers. Silence was paramount. Eye contact was forbidden. Refusal meant disappearance. They were trained daily to hold their breath for increasingly longer periods, eventually working up to 5 minutes of continuous submersion. They learned to move through water without creating splashes, to navigate underwater passages in darkness, and to perform services that destroyed whatever childhood remained in their souls. The psychological manipulation was as carefully designed as the architecture. Boys who pleased the emperor received better food and warmer clothing, creating desperate gratitude for the smallest mercies. Those who showed reluctance faced isolation in underground chambers where dripping water became its own form of torture. What makes this historical horror especially chilling is how completely normalized the abuse became within the villa's isolated world. Staff members discussed imperial recreational needs with the same professional detachment they might apply to dietary requirements. Scribes maintained detailed records of each boy documenting physical development and what they termed service aptitude, creating an administrative paper trail of systematic exploitation. As Tiberius aged, his declining health only intensified his demands. The emperor, now in his 70s, struggled with skin conditions, breathing problems, and digestive issues that might have ended such activities for any normal man. Instead, his physical limitations meant longer sessions as boys were expected to compensate for his failing body with increased effort. Suetonius recorded the specific practices with clinical precision that still disturbs scholars today. The emperor would position himself in the heated pools while children swam around and beneath him, performing acts that historian could barely bring himself to describe in full detail. The most haunting line from Suetonius speaks of infants taken from nursing mothers for purposes that represent the absolute nadir of human depravity. These weren't rumors or political smears written by enemies. These were documented facts recorded by Rome's most respected chroniclers, based on witness testimony and physical evidence that couldn't be denied. When Tiberius finally died on March 16, 37 AD, possibly smothered by his own Praetorian Guard commander who could no longer stomach what he witnessed, the Villa Hobbies was immediately sealed. The boys who survived faced impossible fates. They were witnesses to crimes that threatened imperial dignity, damaged in ways that made normal life unreachable, unsuitable for return to families who'd already mourned them. Most simply vanished from historical record, their individual stories lost among broader chronicles. The pools of Villa Hobbies still exist today on Capri, tourist attractions where visitors snap photos of ancient Roman engineering. Tour guides rarely mention what those marble chambers witnessed, what those carved pools facilitated, what those underground passages concealed. The Mediterranean sun still warms those stones, just as it did in 34 AD when children's laughter turned to screams that could escape beyond those walls. This is the horror of absolute power meeting absolute secrecy. This is what happens when one man's twisted desires become law on an isolated island where ships are monitored and cliffs prevent escape. And this is why we must remember these stories, however dark, however disturbing, because forgetting is its own form of violence against those who suffered. What are your thoughts on how history should handle these darkest chapters? Should we speak these truths plainly, or do some horrors deserve to remain veiled? Share your perspective in the comments below.